In this last video, I'm going to give you a quick run through how, for example, I would set up my environment so I could render this product on a diffuse white background, including drop shadows, or on a black backdrop with a slight ground reflection. So step one, if you go to the world and just to make sure I have nothing, I turn it off. Make sure you're in Cycles Render. Click New, set this to 0, and maybe set this one to 0.8. So this basically means I have a white environment. However, the light strength of my environment is 0, which means if I go and set my viewport to render, I see nothing. Okay, so that is step 1. Step 2, I'm going to add a ground plane. This ground plane I move just very close below my object. And then I'm going to, along the x-axis, set it to 0, and maybe scale it up a little bit like this. And again, like what I mentioned last class, whenever you start doing something in digital rendering, it's not really magic. Try to think about how a photographer is going to work. So I'm going to duplicate my background mesh. So kind of like I have two faces like this. And the reason why I did it is simply I can select now those two edges and then type in spacebar and bridge edge loop. And then inside my tool area, I can add some cuts, like loop cuts. And then for the interpolation, say blend between this surface to this surface over those amount of steps. So this way now I have a nice arced backdrop, and I can select everything, and then inside edit mode, for example, say smooth shading, or while I have everything selected, simply press spacebar and then type in smooth and select shade smooth. Okay. So this is basically now my backdrop. And maybe I move this one a little bit closer. And the reason why, for example, I wanted to have kind of like this backdrop slightly arced is later when we place lights, the geometry will change the way how the surface will be illuminated and actually will kind of like provide a nice gradation in the background. Okay, so step 3, we have to add a light. Again, the easiest way to do is try to think about how you would do in a studio. In a studio, you have your tripod or your rig and your camera, and then you have to move those and rotate the camera all the time. It's very complicated, time consuming, and in 3D we can do it in a similar way but much more flexible. So I press Shift A and add a camera, and maybe I move the camera to here. With S I can scale the camera icon down, because scaling this does not really change the size of my image. It's just scaling the representation of the icon. And then I can press Shift A, add an empty. And the empty I would like maybe to be 5 inches big in my scene. Okay. And the empty will be a reference point the camera will look to. And to always make the camera track the empty, I select my camera, Shift left click, and select my empty. You see both objects are selected, and then I could press Ctrl T and say track constraint. And if I click the camera, and you will see there's an icon with chains, that is where the constraints are. I have a feature added that basically tracks to empty form. So for example, this empty I could call empty camera. And if I go back to here, you see now this is changed to empty camera. The nice part about this is if I move my camera, it always tracks the empty. If I move the empty, the camera always changes its rotation. Because in real life I would have to move the camera and then by hand rotate the camera. And here I have just 2 points, where to look to, from where to look at, and everything else, meaning the rotation is done automatically. And let's say right now I'm working on a side shot, like a profile. So I move the camera slightly to here. Now to take a look through the camera, I'm going to slice my view, my interface here to have another 3D viewport. And then I could press 0 on the numpad, or I could simply click camera, numpad, and there now I can see through my camera. And actually it doesn't. So why? Let's see. Because actually from my original design I have my other lights, so I'm going to delete those quickly so the software does not get confused. Okay, there we are back. So let's press 0 again on the numpad. There we are. Okay, great. Now the nice part is I can use the right part as my camera view, and then my bigger viewport I basically use to change and control the position of my camera and from where it looks into my scene. Okay, so for example, there's another feature that could be worth mentioning for the camera. Everybody who's familiar with photography, you know about like compositional guides. For example, you could turn on the thirds and then use those maybe as a reference to, for example, design your scene a little bit more. And of course, when you look down, the object looks odd. If you really look from way below, the object looks superimposed but odd as well. So maybe something like here, this might work well. Okay, let's maybe center everything. Okay, because all I want right now is a nice side profile view. Doesn't look very dramatic, but that's okay. Okay, let's say I also would like to have one shot where maybe I see a detail. For the detail, let's say maybe the dots or the dial on top. So I can select my empty and my camera, Shift D. So I duplicate the set. And you see I'm placing this empty right where this button is. And then I can move my camera closer. The empties are actually too big, so I'm going to change their scale. Okay. Now to switch between different cameras, the easiest way, to be honest, is select your camera and then in the view where you would like to have your camera view, press Ctrl and 0. So Ctrl 0 always switches between the different cameras, while 0 alone is only perspective view, camera view. But Ctrl 0 switches between the camera you have selected. Okay, so maybe here I can zoom in a little bit more and maybe rotate my view slightly so I get a better detail, or maybe from here. So you see it's really nice because the image will be cropped, so everything what you see here inside this line, that is what will be on your rendering. Everything outside will be outside your image. So it's kind of like cropping this view for you. So think about this like a viewfinder. Okay, so now we have placed two different cameras. That was step 3. Step 4, we have to add lights. In photography, in the studio, the most commonly used type of light are area lights or light boxes. And Blender, like most render engines, have a similar light that emit light from a surface, not from a point. So I press Shift A, lamp, area light. And to get something nicely, softly illuminated, the lights need to be decently bigger than, for example, my main object. So I see this light is 3, nearly 4 inches, but maybe it should be 2 feet big. So you see now the light is a little bit bigger, and maybe I just place it here and let me save, because now we're going to try a test render. And you see the scene is very, very bright, and that is because the light is very strong. If I, for example, set this to 1, you see there's just a little bit of light coming down, and maybe 4. So maybe I'll leave it at this level. And I want the light just to come straight down. Or maybe if I go to here, you see I shine a little bit more light on the front part. If I reverse, I shine more light on, see, the back part. But maybe in this case, since we're doing our first renders tests, we try to keep it simple. So we just keep him up there. Now this rendering looks a little bit blah. Doesn't really have a lot of depth. The trick about digital rendering is, again, the same like in photography, having nice contrasts. And here's one really nice trick. Whenever you don't really know what to do, Google it. So, for example, I go into Car Photo Studio and go to Images. And you see here, basically, kind of like super guidelines and how you have to set up everything. So you see the workflow I use is heavily informed actually by my workflow. So for example, here's a light that's being shot against the back. Maybe for example here in this image you can see how large this light is in relationship to the size of my car. Really big lights create very soft shadows. For example, here you see the whole environment is nice and diffused. Nothing is black, but then the environment here is black. But again, this is kind of like a huge diffuser, big area light, very soft. And for example, here in this photo, you can clearly see that the way how they wanted to shoot the picture, a lot of reflections are on top of the car. Here is another one, a nice backdrop, big lights, and some, for example, this one is actually good. Let's zoom in. There you can see you have small spotlights. They actually blast the light onto this white wall, and then the light bounces back. There's also like a reflection board and like a flash here. And you see, I'm basically doing nearly the same. But to make this shape now pop out better, I need additional lights, because think about light also as painting or sketching, because you paint with light. So I need additional lights. So I do this, Shift D, maybe move it to the side, then I rotate it -90 so it's horizontal. And maybe I position it to there so the light is more horizontally flowing along this edge. And you see immediately the rendering starts looking much nicer because there is more definition. You see there's a nice play between illuminated areas and darker areas. So if I go to this camera view, now this one, for example, right now it doesn't really look good. So let's go back to here. Okay, so maybe one last light. Maybe I put this light actually to here, rotate it. I'm trying to see maybe how I could utilize it. And I'm adjusting it in the left side, but also paying close attention to the way how it turns out. And you see that now everything is brighter, but at the same time it looks uniform again. So this light does not really add lots of characters. You see right now, specifically this part here, it has different gradation or gray values, which makes everything stand out nicely. And if I move this one to here, I illuminate the shadow areas and make things look flat. So the light here doesn't really work. But what I'm going to do, I'm actually deciding to put something on the backdrop. Kind of like what they did with the car. So maybe like this. And then the strength, of course, I can tone down, or maybe a 1. See? Okay. This light from here, maybe with a value of 4, that's not really enough. Maybe I set it to 6. That's too much. Maybe 5. Yeah, okay. That's not too bad. Also, one small trick, when, for example, you don't really know how strong a light affects your scene. For example, I'm working here with my backdrop light. Just give the light a color. So you can see actually what in your scene it is illuminating and where it is illuminating your scene. Because, for example, here I can see it's slightly off, and I would like this halo to be more centered. And maybe smaller. Rotate it. There. And then I give it like an 80% white again. This is maybe too circular, so I'm going to rectangle and make the whole piece. Oh, nope, not this way. Should be 2 feet by 1 feet. No, 1 foot. Okay, great. Good. So this is, for example, the quality or setup of rendering I would like you to do for next class. At least it should have those elements like 2 to 3 lights, a backdrop, which can be white, different materials on your objects. But now, how do you turn this into a final rendering? First, something to point out, probably most people only see a rendering like this, kind of coarse. Stops at sample 10. So what you need to do is go to camera, preview, so more samples, and maybe type in 50. And then you see it, the countdown goes further. And the more samples you add, the cleaner the image will get. So it takes longer, time is still running. And the more basically you let the image cook, the better the results can get. So now to do a final rendering, you could go to dimension. And I think at the moment with most you will have 1650 by 1275. That is, for example, the amount of pixels. And for example, if you change this to, I don't know, maybe 2, you can see how your camera format actually changes. So what you see here, the cropping, that is driven by the amount of pixels you put in here. And currently the image will be rendered with 50%. So I would like you to have 1650 by 1275 by 100%. And now, how do you make sure how many pixels do you need, or samples, sorry. So that is, for example, now where the preview can come in very handy, because I still can clearly see the grain with 200. Let's set this one to 600. So I let it work and work and work and work. And now I notice that roughly around 300, it starts getting okay. So because we're not really making a presentation image for a client, we're just doing a test rendering, 300 will be sufficient. So let me save. And then for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to scale this one down so the rendering goes faster. Then to do a final rendering, simply click render inside the render button, or go render and render. Then this UV image editor opens, and you see that your computer starts working on the final image. There, perfect. And when this is basically done, this image took 14 seconds. You could go to Image, Save As, and then wherever you're saving it, for example, I call this one Render Site. And then you can select JPEG for final renderings. That's perfectly fine. But might be better if you want to go later into Photoshop or so to work with PNG or TIFF actually. And then you simply click Save. And then this rendering is saved. So that is basically now the way how I would like you to work through. Now if you would like to have a second view, so for example I had this camera here, and let's click and let's do kind of like a rendered. Now the problem I see here is, well, it's not really very interesting, so maybe this focus is not really very ideal. Let's see maybe if there is some sort of detail or view that could be more interesting. So maybe instead of following a very strong symmetry, I'm using my thirds to have each dial onto one of those crosses here. Yeah, maybe like this. Okay. But the problem you see is like my backdrop there is odd. So there are multiple ways I can rotate all my lights, all my object, or in this case, to be honest, I am simply just going to rotate this one so it fills my backdrop perfectly. Okay, like this. And then if I go to the image editor, you also have different slots. This means you can have multiple renderings actually stored. So if I go to slot 2 and click render, see it's working. Okay. Let's save this one. For example, I call this one detail or feature, or however you want to name those. And then see here, I can inside the software actually switch between them. I could also press J to flip. And where this, for example, can be very, very useful is when, let's say, I go to here, and maybe I'm going to add another light. So go to here and maybe rotate it so it's a little bit stronger. Maybe 1 foot. Make it actually a rectangle. So 5 inches by 1 foot. Maybe to there. 2, 1. They're still too big, so maybe 0.5. Because I would like is just that maybe the top part gets a little bit more light, and then to the bottom part it fades out slightly. So I bring the light very close, which means I have to be careful with the strength of the light and dim it down. 0.4 maybe, and then again copy C. Let's see, where is this light actually really working on? So now I know actually, right? No, it seems to be definitely more on the top part. Okay, so Apple V, make it white again, 0.2, because I have to scale it down. 0.1. Yeah, maybe like this. Let's say this is okay. So I go to my image editor. I'm in render results. I go to slot 2, click render. And it's working a little bit. And then now with J, I can flip between the different images and see if maybe one looks better. And you can clearly see this still looks flat. This actually looks better. So sometimes it's also very good just to have finished preview renderings, and then you can quickly play through different versions to see if maybe you just got used to a certain look looking good, and by comparison there might be a different version that actually looks better. So actually I will go with this. So I know to round this up, like as I think now this should be maybe step 5 or 6. Let's think about a black backdrop. A black backdrop that is also transparent is very easy. So we make it new, material. And of course, instead of being white and diffuse, we simply say it should be glossy. And making it glossy turns into reflective. Now everything is black. The reason why everything is black is simply my world strength is set to 0. If, for example, if this is set to 5, you can see everything, like my whole world is being reflected. So that's, for example, important to have this one, and why to have this one set to 0. And now let's go back to the material. Maybe let's call this one floor. The reflection is very strong. To tone down the reflection, an easy quick fix would be, instead of white, tone it down maybe to like a gray. And now to maybe blur this, I can play with the roughness. 0.1 maybe? No, this might be too much. Maybe 0.05. And you see the smaller the value, the better, crisper something gets. Okay, and now we see something in the front is actually happening. That is actually because of a light. So let's see which light that actually could be. So if I zoom out, I can see all these light reflections. And the easiest way to figure this out is, again, color your lights. The reflection is still white, so this light is not it. What about you? Nope, that's not it. This one? Yeah, this one is it. You see? So this piece actually is reflected. And actually, I'm illuminating actually a reflective surface in the backdrop, which doesn't really make sense. So in this case, for this rendering, for example, I simply turn this light off. Now, the last thing, I think at this point that is good to point out is, let's say you want to get rid of those fireflies you see there. You see those dots? A little bit annoying. To do this, we could go to, where is it? There. Currently, for the reflection stuff, turn this on, and then those dots are gone. This is a shortcut. There are multiple other reasons and technicalities also behind, which, however, I don't really want to elaborate on right now because I don't want to confuse you too much. There will be more coming this semester. But at the moment, whenever you see those white dots, go to the camera, go to light paths, and just turn caustics off. And yeah, so this basically would then finish this complete lecture series about your introduction into subdivision surface modeling, how to construct a design based on blueprints, how to use the different modifiers, and like what we did the last part, use digital painting on your design to create material separations, and then also create materials, material colors, and even place like decals, and then putting everything into a scene like here for rendering, while borrowing techniques basically every studio photographer would use.